fearless leader. You feel fearless? Or do you feel vulnerable?
Lance, if you could confirm all of your recording.
Leadership role, I don't.
Okay, we are live and ready, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to call to order this meeting and pass it over.
Sure, roll call, got Siobhan Collier, not here, Miranda Kenner,
Here.
Anthony I'm sorry,
Gallardo.
Gallardo, Valerie Black, here, John Todd, and online Stacy Meyer,
Here.
and Brad Snap. I believe Brad Snap will be joining us in just a little while. Thank you all. And so thank you to the board and everybody for coming back here this week. We met last week to present 2 applications for the Housing Development Loan Program. And at that point in time, we heard presentations from both applicants and had early conversation, had the chance for board members to ask some questions of the applicants, and then agreed to resume that conversation and that meeting with evaluating both applications and potentially making recommendations to council today. So I'm Sarah Gooding, I'm your real property section manager, and wanted to just share a little bit of review about the Housing Development Loan Program and the analysis for where we are today. So the Housing Development Loan Program is a local program that uses federal home funds that are given to Wichita as an entitlement funding resource. The Housing Development Loan Program, or HDLP, is used to create affordable housing for low and moderate income households. And the city received approximately $1.7 million in its 2023 allocation. Now, out of that allocation, we do have a few federal parameters that we have to operate within. One of those is that community housing development organizations, also known as CHODOs, must not receive less than 15% of that. In the past, sometimes that has been managed separately. We actually now are just managing that within to make sure that at least that 15% is allocated to a qualifying organization. And so as allocations were made and approved by council, the portion allocated to single family home ownership was $600,000 for the 2022 funding year. And so we're talking different funding years. We do receive funds every year, and then often we actually work in prior program years. And so we shift to the $600,000 that's allocated in 2022. And that includes a project max of $90,000 per project. And so applications can come in for less than or up to that amount. So the reason that we do this program is because in infill development, it is very challenging to bridge that gap between what the cost to build a property might be versus what it will appraise for in the fair market. Banks aren't eager to lend funds for something beyond what its appraised value is, and yet the costs to build often exceed that appraised value. However, this also utilizes or supports development of idle or underutilized real estate in these areas. So places where we have infrastructure in place, utilities, streets, sidewalks, those are things that are very expensive to build in new development areas and often require several hundred a month in specials. And so when we can do infill development, it helps to support opportunities on lots that otherwise might just have vacant or abandoned houses or be vacant lots entirely. Often these lots become overgrown and blighted if they're not owned and maintained. And so this also provides affordable housing in these target areas and allows that redevelopment of neighborhoods. And so applicants can be for-profit or nonprofit organizations. And then the end projects must serve households with incomes that don't exceed 80% of area median income. And so that is adjusted by household size and it's updated annually by HUD. And so as the board reviews, discusses, and scores these applications, Each area will be assigned a maximum number of points, and each board member can assign their evaluated number of points and then submit rankings. I would, as a staff member, respectfully request that those be whole number increments, just because that makes doing the math a little bit easier. Board members may discuss this together in the open meeting, and we will probably actually toggle to where we can see the Teams meeting at that point when we're in discussion. That way we can identify if any board members online are also looking to chime in. City staff provided scores and analysis for item number 6, which has to do with the history of each applicant with this program. And then at the end, we will collect the scores, because all notes and scores are part of this project file. So based on some of the conversation last week, I wanted to just share what staff have looked at as we have brought these forward. Basically, staff conduct a pre-review to make sure that everything is present. We conduct some cursory environmental review, review of the applications. And we also look at how does this fit within the framework of what's been allocated, so that you can have that information as you make decisions. So this year, for the 2022 program funding year, $600,000 was allocated for single-family home ownership. There is a separate pot for multifamily, and we may have applications separately for that amount. We've received requests from Mennonite Housing and also from Wichita Habitat for Humanity. Each of the organizations are proposing 4 builds, or 8 builds total. And the total requests that we have brought to the board total $507,931.60. And so if the board were to choose to fund applications as presented, we would still have just a little bit over $90,000 remaining. And so we could fund one more project at max or multiple projects at less than max. Staff also did reach out to other developers that had participated in this program in the past. And at this point in time, we have not received any information about requests in the pipeline. And so we were comfortable bringing this to the board, knowing we would have potentially one more project to award in this funding year, and that we would not be shutting anybody out who has a pending application based on this request. The amount set aside by council for Chodo is actually a little bit more than the 15% requirement. And so for 2022, that amount is $300,000. Of our 2 applicants, Mennonite Housing is a Chodo, Habitat for Humanity is not. And Mennonite Housing's request, I believe, total $360,000. And so the Chodo obligation would be met through this proposed application. And so wanted to really quickly review just high points of each application. With Mennonite Housing, they've requested $360,000 or the maximum $90,000 per project to build 4 homes. Their organization's cost to build each of these homes would be $212,067. Requested subsidy is $90,000 per home. They have demonstrated that they have a line of credit of $1.5 million with Fidelity Bank. Their sales price of each home is $122,067, and that is based on their understanding of current appraisals. They also are able to bring some funding to the table through Capital Federal, which provides, often has done their loans and their underwriting, and provides $1,500 per home for this project. They are looking at 4 sites within the Northeast neighborhoods. They're not all concentrated, but they are all fairly close together in this area. And I believe they do have purchase options on each site. So I'm going to skip this staff recommendation, we'll come back. Their second applicant is Habitat for Humanity. They're requesting $147,931 to build 4 homes. Their cost to build each home is $189,253.90. And within that, the subsidy requested is $36,982.90. And a lot of this has to do with their model, that they are able to get those builds and that gap down to that point. They are looking at sales prices for each home. Their base model would be the 3-bedroom, 1-bath at $132,000, up to a 5-bedroom, 2-bath at $165,000. Their model does not use outside funding. They self-finance their loans, and they do require all applicants for home ownership to complete sweat equity, which also goes into helping with that build and with that cost structure. They also do quite a bit of fundraising and donations. And they're proposing 4 adjacent sites right here. That does allow them some economies of scale. And we'll say that based on just what we've seen so far, it's impressive to be able to get 4 sites in proximity that way. And so with that, I would invite our chair to facilitate the conversation and for the board to evaluate whether or not they are comfortable recommending these as proposed to council. And the recommendation, if you recommend them to council, would be for conditional approval of funding. And I'll put some text up on the page as well, but it's sample text. But basically what we would be doing is requesting basically the council to conditionally allocate that funding, and then we would take this back to council as we form a contract on each particular build. And at that point, that funding would be finalized. And so, also as the board discussed, please feel free to have me move back and forth through the slides. I'm glad to pull up information that would be helpful. And in the meantime, I'm going to actually sit out of here so we can see our other board members on the Teams call. Okay.
All right, so I'd like us to move forward and discuss the applications. We will start with Mennonite housing in the order, I guess, we were presented. Does anyone want to lead us off as to what they felt for the first potential scoring, which is a developer plan, section 1 in our evaluation sheet? And I'll just kind of go off of what staff had for us here. They put the project as a 4 single-family new construction, infill homes. As mentioned before, they're requesting $90,000 per house construction. For the worksheet, a total amount of $360,000. Did anyone share their scoring and how they scored their general plan as far as how they outlined what they're going to construct, their floor plans, where seems to be like the most important thing to evaluate them on this section?
I did score them as a 10. They didn't meet all the identified requirements or answered all the questions in that section.
Somewhat negative was I felt like their narrative, their actual description of the projects was limited. It's more that spelled out in floor plans and photographs and things like that, but the actual written narrative was the thing I saw that wasn't 100% thorough in my opinion. Nothing, not enough to question their direction or anything like that. So I had given it a 9.
Fair. John, did you have any feedback as well as 10 for you as well?
Well, I'd settle for maybe an average score.
Average score? You want to put a number on it? A solid number from 1 to 10?
So 9.
9.
And board members don't have to come to a complete consensus. In the end, the only consensus that would be required is, well, it's judged by the vote, and that even doesn't have to be a consensus. That will be a majority.
What does Brad think?
We have Brad now? We don't have Brad yet.
I am curious, has it always been the norm that when they respond to the questions in the applications, because they've applied for so many, that they don't expound as much? Or, I mean, I kind of wanted to know about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's probably an accurate read. So this is a new process for these applications. Historically, they had, this program was previously managed by Mark Stanberry, and he had managed this program for 25 years. So I think there was a lot of assumed familiarity, both between city staff and nonprofits. And so that's an area that probably some assumption carried forward. So I'm also glad to take notes on how we can refine our application process to have better processes serve the information that the board wishes to receive.
I think it would be good if they can expound a little bit more on the questions asked or the descriptions that we asked for on the application. I mean, for them to keep in the frame of mind that these are people who are reading our applications who may not even know about us.
And I think we can develop the application process, I should say refine it, so that there is a little bit more of a storytelling component. I think last week, this board had asked for a list of board members for each of the organizations, and so we can include information like that.
Was there a reason why when Mark retired, they went to this sort of board?
Actually, that precedes me. I think in many ways, this board was created for the distribution of the Affordable Housing Fund funds.
This is not part of it.
Well, and at that same time, this was an item that had previously been done through staff review. And it felt like there was an opportunity to have more public review and input on these allocation.
Well, I'd say I have had experience in doing infill lots, working with the builder who built on them successfully. And I will say to you that this whole thing is extremely complicated. And so to a certain extent, I don't really feel qualified to review it. So. And put a stamp of approval on it, because it involved $90,000 of federal money. Houses we built didn't involve any federal money. And, you know, we did visit about this. Shotos, are there any private sector for-profit groups doing it?
Yeah, this is the area I'm still learning as well. I actually did find a resource in my materials today on what chotos are. If you look at the bottom of your stack, I can go over that real quick. And so we're a private nonprofit community service organization. And so if there's any feedback from here, let me know as well, because I have my back to it. And so they must be tax exempt. They can be a 501c3, 501c4, or a section 905 status.
So the answer is no.
They have to,
They have to be a nonprofit.
yes, for the Choto specifically, and that is for the 15% threshold. And one of the one of the key components, and this is where the structures differ and Mennonite House is that at least 1/3 must be representatives of the low income community. And then no more than 1/3 may be public officials. And see, and then it says the balance is unrestricted and may include people such as human and social service providers. So there are some components to how that board is structured that go into that requirement.
And if you can, is there a reason why Habitat for Humanity is not Choto? Is it because they're don't meet one of these requirements as far as like not having representatives from the low income community, or?
That would be my guess. I'm not a technical expert in that yet, but I could double check on that actually.
That would actually be a good question to ask in the application. If they're not Choto, why aren't they? And then they can maybe point out in the, based off of this criteria, what criteria do they not meet? And if they do plan to meet it in the future.
And my guess would be that Habitat for Humanity is an international organization. And so this is a local chapter or branch of that organization. And I'm guessing that the structures are just a little bit different. And so it's not that we can't award funds to non-CHODOs or only have to award to CHODOs. But federally, we are mandated to award at least 15% of that grant to qualify.
This 300,000, 360 meets that requirement.
Yes, it does.
So that's why we really,
Yes, if we had other CHODOs in the mix, then it would really be up to the board. We do have one other that is currently active as a builder, and that is Danny Jacob and Jacob's Ladder. And we did reach out to him, and we have not confirmed that he has any plans to apply. I think historically he has done 1 or 2 builds at a time, but often at a smaller scale.
For the record, I'd like to point out that Brad's staff has joined us.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Brad.
Hi.
well, Brad worked for the department for a lot of years. And I'd be real interested in seeing what his input is on the development plan. What you're thinking on that, Brad?
You talking to me?
Yes, so as you're getting up to speed, Brad, we are in our conversation about the application and discussing evaluations of the development plan. And specifically, you actually probably bring some of the history here that I don't. But talking about just whether they feel like the development plan reflects the detailed narrative description of projects proposed, description of housing, and whether it adequately describes the proposed site, neighborhood, environmental assessments. And does it fit with existing land use of that area, in that neighborhood?
Which one is it? Mennonite or Habitat?
Tonight, number 1 question. Developer plan.
Development plan? I give him 10 points. You want me to know why?
Yes.
Okay, because they had the 4 lots identified, they had options to buy. They included 4 plans and a photo of one that had just been recently completed. They said how they would fill the lots, their plans would sit on the lots, had a 12-month completion period. They expected to have the environmental review completed within 90 days. And that was why.
You mentioned Mark Stanberry, and I knew Mark casually for a number of years. I've known Brad also casually. Mark certainly has had 25 years, had a lot of institutional knowledge that we're sorely, from my perspective, I'm sorely lacking. And I'm not going to talk about the other committee members, but what Brad's saying has a lot of credibility. The question I would have in the past, were any of the projects audited? And what were the findings on some of those audits? Did they meet the criteria?
Do you happen to have any history on?
Ed monitors all programs. That's a matter of business. So I'm sure they've been audited. However, that predates my tenure. Brad, would you be able to speak to that as the home program has been audited?
Well, the city has a new auditor. Maybe they should be called in to take a look at the. I'm not trying to throw a wrench in any of this stuff, but basically, we're being asked to make some pretty important decisions that involve actually quite a bit of federal money. So, and I know Mennonite's been around for years. I've kind of tracked them from distance, basically. I don't know totally what they do. And also, you know, one of the things on the development of the plan plus developer's fee, they're being paid pretty well to do this, $19,278. They're a nonprofit. Where does that money go?
We could consider asking that in application moving forward. And also this is a recommendation to approve. So at the end of the day, we're not the final stamp of approval. We're saying we reviewed it and agree with either staff or disagree. And at that point, we could come up with why we disagree. And at the end of the day, again, the council will make the decision. Even if we disagree, they can still proceed and decide, okay, although the board decided Mennonite should not get funding or should get less funding, we're gonna grant them the full amount or whatever the case may be. That's what we're here to convene and to kind of discuss how we feel moving forward with Mennonite's application, how we rated them. And I know Sarah said that we don't have to reach a consensus, but just one of those things where we could keep that in mind as we. But these are all good points to add to application moving forward. We could recommend to have less funding or even just more questions. But again, it's going to be up to the city council to approve it. If that's correct, right? We're just kind of giving them our thoughts as the public. So we don't necessarily have to be experts, but just as what we see, we're able to, have some feedback. And
Part of my problem, Anthony, I really don't feel qualified. I've had a lot of experience with doing houses, but I don't feel qualified to answer these questions. This is a lot of information. I don't question it at all. It's accurate. I can't imagine that any of this information is fabricated. But I know for a fact that these numbers are correct. So
one of the things that we could use to, I guess, use judgment is they did provide a 5-year funding history as to what has been completed. And I know this was last board meeting as well. But that is one way we could kind of gather and see if they're able to complete their end of the bargain. So I would imagine because they're not a new organization, we could apply some sort of trust with the documentation they're providing. I would assume they don't want to commit.
if it was your money, would you do it? If it was your $90,000, would you do it?
My $90,000. Well, I mean, it's 90,000 times 4, but I definitely would ask more questions. But we're at the stage where I'm not sure if we're going to be able to send this back just due to time constraints. But we can revise or recommend to revise the applications moving forward so that we're a little bit more sure when we're making these decisions. We could rate them really low. We could provide our feedback, and
I don't feel qualified to rate them high or low.
They've given us their balance sheet, their profit and loss sheet.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not lenders. We can't request, maybe we could, bank statements, payroll, things like that. They're being pretty transparent with where their money is.
Yeah. And I do want to point out the developer fee of 10%. I believe Habitat for Humanity also has a 10%, and that must be a cap since, if there was more, yeah, I'm sure one or the other would probably do more. But yeah, they both have 10% developer fee, so at least it's consistent with it.
Have a nice paycheck, $80,000.
The developer fee's only
That is kind of a mirror of the overall program. I could run back to the main slide where it shows, we received approximately 1.7 million and 10% of that is allocated for admin. And so we know that there is, there's bookkeeping, there's paperwork, there's a lot that goes into that. So that is in line with the overarching as well.
That Mennonite is making too much money on the deal or what? I mean, you can't expect an organization to work for free. Habitat's got a lot of volunteers apparently that helps their bottom line.
I appreciate your comments, Brad.
I might just add, this is Stacy. John, I agree with you in a certain in a certain way where I also don't feel like I'm fully qualified to make these decisions. However, I really see us as a partnership with the staff so that decisions aren't getting made in a silo, that we participate with the staff who do have more subject matter experts to help us understand each of the scoring mechanisms, all of the documentation provided to us so that we can, help resolve any known conflicts or just provide that, oversight along with the staff just to make a sound recommendation to city council members. But it's all in collaboration with the city staff, in my opinion.
That's the dual point of verification where we want to make sure that we are bringing the board something that has been well reviewed. I can say with the Midnight application, we actually started out with a proposal for 5 properties. And in conversation between staff and Midnight Housing, I think both of us felt more comfortable with the proposal that had 4. And that was for a variety of reasons. It's a project 4 to 5 line was a different critter in terms of environmental concerns. It would have maxed out the funding allocation. And so there were some of those conversations in the staff vetting process to get to the point of saying, yes, we as well are comfortable bringing this recommendation. And while you have 3 of us in the room today, there are several others who have also been part of that vetting process.
And as a staff member who's been involved in this program for a year and a half, 2 years, I'll say that these applications are very much in line with previous applications that have been presented and awarded. And the only real difference is there's escalation in cost, and that's because that's something that's being experienced widely. But both organizations have a track record of successful applications, completions, and ultimate sales to the target audience.
I just mentioned the market. I forgot to make a break in my presentation earlier, but I know Miranda she had reached out midweek last week with some information on current market conditions. And this could be an opportunity to share a little bit about what you're seeing in your world.
Everyone look at that in the email with my PDFs and. Okay. If you want me to expand or summarize it again, I can, but short story is, I mean, they're wanting they have 122,000 for a 3-bedroom, 1 bath. You can't even build it for that. You're building it for 160,000 if you're lucky in the regular market. Bump it up to a 4.2 or a 5.2 like Habitat for Humanity wants. You're at 155, 165, 185, over 200. So as we know, they are definitely making their money work for them and making it affordable. Sell it to. Appraisal wise, I don't think they're going to run into issues. I'm looking up comparable homes that have sold in the last 90 days, and we're at a median price of $129,900. And these are houses that are 80 years old, built in the 40s. Rough kitchens, typically small bathrooms, typically small bedrooms. And then the Wichita Housing Forecast Conference that was at Wichita State University just a couple weeks ago, our prices are still appreciating. We're not in the 20% like we were 2 years ago, but we're projected to be 3.5%. This year we appreciated 4.5% in our minimums. Or 3.4% is the forecast for appreciation. We're still well below a balanced market. We're still needing inventory. This helps fill that need in houses that are safe, affordable. What else do I have here? I think that was the gist of it. It's just that they're building these houses incredibly affordable for the money that they're asking. And
Especially for the area that they're in.
and for the area, yeah, we have something safe. We're not having crumbling foundations, we're having energy efficiency. And it's not that I'm looking from the outside. I literally own a house in one of these areas and rent a few houses. I have one at 18th and Laura that we just rented. Not a terrible house, but not a real convenient house. She can't even fit a queen bed in the bedroom, things like that. Leaky windows, things like that. So
Add on that there are fairly stringent requirements on energy efficiency and other standards that these do have to meet to qualify for the federal.
strict real estate perspective, what they're doing is pretty phenomenal in my opinion. And I understand we might want to cross-examine details a little bit further, but track records and current market, it all makes sense to me.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Making sure that we stay on pace in terms of time, I would recommend moving discussion toward item number 2 and moving on through just to make sure that we have plenty of time for the second application as well.
Yes, we could move on to discussing Habitat for Humanity application.
I'm so sorry. Still on Mennonite housing.
Number 2 on there.
For the additional.
Okay, so number 2, yeah, so we can keep moving on. Other
Okay.
financing and matching funds for Mennonite housing. Any thoughts or feedback there for the application?
Thought it was pretty clear on pages 13 to 16. They had all their ducks in a row.
They had good documentation on their commitments.
I also agree, the application did have a lot of documentation. However, I did rate it an 8 just because I docked a few points just because I feel like they're heavily exposed on the sales price to break even. And based off their history, it seems like they added a lot of funding increases. I know COVID had a huge impact on that. So just with that being said, I know they're also requesting more 90,000 so that hopefully could match their projections and be able to build this. But it does seem like they rely a lot on the loans to get this built. And then so you're subject to the market, which we've seen housing has been more incredibly difficult to finance. So they're relying on that $1.5 million line of credit from Fidelity. If I'm not mistaken, right, it was Fidelity. So I would like to see potentially more donations or more self-sustaining or a little bit more cushion in their projections as far as like if they're not able to meet that sales price, which Dolly's point here, she mentioned that they shouldn't have any issue with the appraisal or sales price, but my worry is just market conditions and ability to sell the house to the appropriate buyers in terms of the buyers also have to meet the qualifications and be within the standards and also have to qualify for the loan. So at the interest rates we're at today, it would be pretty difficult. As far as what debt to income has to be, what income max there is, because now there's a ceiling because these are affordable housing units. So just things to keep in mind. As far as like we'd like to see more breakdown or potential plans if they're not able to sell these homes to qualified buyers and all that stuff. And I think they did mention if they didn't sell within 9 months, they're eligible to rent them. So that's good. I don't think they had to do that with other previous houses, but that was just kind of feedback I had for number 2.
I would also add from the staff analysis, you'll note that it says that home program regulations require a 25% local match. Now that is actually satisfied across the whole program and not necessarily project by project. Mennonite Housing does bring some match in the form of fee waivers, which are through the city, as well as some of the loan for cap fed and some things like that. At this point in time, they have not had a history of bringing a 25% match. However, some of that match can also, on the Habitat side, some of that match can be realized through Habitat does interest-free loans. And so the interest that would have been collected on their loans counts as match. and heavily satisfies that match requirement for the whole program. So I did want to note that within the technicalities of the match requirement, that we are satisfied, but the project does not necessarily meet that on its own.
It doesn't.
No, but we're not looking at a project by project. My understanding is it's programmatic and not even necessarily year by year, but that there is actually an accumulation of match that has been realized historically, and Habitat zero interest loans more than qualify and actually have us with a backlog of plenty of match to
We
go.
talk about Mennonite or Habitat.
I'm specifically on Mennonite. These do not in and of themselves meet the match requirement, but the match requirement is met overall. Sorry, I'm blending the two together in that explanation.
Do your habitat, so I try to make sure that we're being fair. And I know to Brad's point, you know, he mentioned it's gonna be almost impossible to meet or match what Habitat has since it's such a huge organization. And we can't expect people to work for free and all that good stuff. So it's good to keep that in mind while we're reviewing these applications as well.
It's Brad or who's the other?
Brad right there.
Sarah?
Brad and Stacy, as well as Jacqueline, is actually joining us online. She had another appointment.
I didn't know if they had some.
Dave Johnson, who is our staff attorney.
Do you have any input, Stacy or Brad?
Brad, do you have?
Number
any
two,
comments?
I'm fine with number two. And like say, Habitat exceeds Mennonite's matchings. But, you know, both meet the qualifications.
Thank you.
I would agree. And Sarah, thanks for explaining the 25% local match. I just had a blank area there. I didn't know how to assess that. So that's helpful to know that it's met across the entire program.
Yes, yes, and from, and historically too, it has accumulated. What I understand.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 3, which is qualifications, development project management experience of applicant. I guess I'll just start us off. I deducted a few points here as well. I scored them an 8. And the reason why is because in that particular question, they answered with text. I would like to see subcontractors, like previous invoices of how much they were charged. And if either staff or the applicant could provide a market cost analysis, depending, comparing their subs to the standard market. Is it above, below, or just at standard? We'd like to make sure that their subs are charging them the appropriate amounts and not excessively charging them. And if they are undercharging them as like for courtesy or nonprofit, explaining that and all that good stuff, so we could definitely make sure that the subcontractors are within market. And I'll, pass it on to whoever wants to provide comment on that as well.
So it sounds like we would need to add a question maybe to that.
When you say,
Certainly.
excuse me, when you say change the question, you're not thinking about going back and amending the application now, are you?
No, this is just going forward.
Yeah, moving forward.
That'd be a good idea.
And this is a good exercise of this application on its first time through and allows us to better collect in that future.
I don't like exercise in general, to tell you the truth.
It scored a 14, solely because they showed a plumbing invoice, but I didn't really see a narrative of their history with subcontractors. Like, we've had a working relationship with this plumber for such and such amount of time, even if it's 6 months, because subs change. They change prices, they change employees. they can become flaky. So I can understand if you don't have a long history with subcontractors, but just something in there that would indicate time. Nice to see. So I gave it a 14 out of 15. Everything else. The market, no, never mind. That's for another block. I'm good.
On number 3, and maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but you know, it talks about marketing and selling in historic neighborhoods. But that's on the rating form, but I didn't see anything pertaining to that in the application.
Thank you.
It's a good question. It ought to be in there, but we can't rank it on something that wasn't asked.
What does that mean? I mean, as far as historic influences, are you referring to redlining or?
Lance might actually have more knowledge within those. I can take a first stab while you got it. Within another program that we operate, if you have construction in the surrounding area that's over a certain age, then you may have to consider historical considerations. Certain neighborhoods, you may have to match construction styles or materials or things like that to honor the historical character of the neighborhood.
You read my mind. That was my thought going in, is that new construction in a mature neighborhood, the experience they have in doing so, selling in those neighborhoods.
That's what historical tends to refer to within our.
On to item number 4, financial feasibility of the development plans and timeframe. Wants to provide feedback on that? You say go for it.
Well, at first, I was a little confused. I thought they didn't provide any kind of proposed timetable. But if you look at number 1, it's under number 1, not necessarily under number 4.
Yeah, I had to backtrack with like that and how they market the properties, how they identify buyers. It was kind of mixed in there as well.
We can work with the application in the future to clarify that, make it easier to follow too.
Yeah, I agree. Mennonite's answers and application was a little bit out of order. It seems like they did a cut and paste off of something else and didn't really follow the application as well.
And I felt they had a realistic timeline. However, I feel like they should manage expectations a little bit better. And again, I know COVID affected them previously, but it seems like they haven't been able to meet their timelines time and time again. So I feel like maybe revisions to those. I know in 2020, it looks like they haven't requested any completion extensions, but that was my feedback there. That maybe adding context. I know that again, with the application being somewhat out of order, that would just be feedback to them as well to like maybe provide some analysis on previous timelines given and whether they were met and what were obstacles or challenges that they face and why they weren't able to meet their previous projected timelines, but they are hoping or more sure of being able to do or same timelines they have.
I think we shared a little bit last week on the item number 6 and their funding history and looking at the staff analysis of historical. What I will say is that prior to COVID, they were very, very reliable. And I think there is the hope and the expectation that post-COVID that will resume. Still working through a few things that began during that season and know that there were impacts. We know that we're still not in the same world. Certainly from the staff side, we will be working to manage timelines along the way with any developers that do receive funding to try to make sure that everything is staying on track, because in the future, any timeline extensions or additional funding requests also will be coming back before this board on the way to council.
Those
That has been
delays and
happening.
Those delays and extensions were by all of our development.
And I think John was saying that that hasn't been happening.
It has been happening. There's one up on Ash Street that I've been following, that it's been extended. It's more like 97,000.
And so some of those, the reason that those have not come back before this board is that they did not begin before this board. So we're carrying forward in the same way they've begun, but anything out of this batch would be subject to coming back before this board for any sort of extensions. And it would be an opportunity to ask the developer for those extenuating circumstances.
Okay, we can move on to item number 5 for Mennonite. You want to have it back? General discussion, if you were concerned. Questions about something wasn't clear.
It was pretty thorough. I mean, they spelled out that they've been involved in the home program for over 20 years. They've completed 30 homes. They showed their cash flows. They have 49 years of experience in our market. They included their 2022 audit report, balance sheet, profit and loss. Felt that they covered those bases pretty well. A 10.
Thank you.
I'll scale with 10. They do definitely demonstrate their ability to build homes with these funds. And this is just feedback for the overall application. Would be nice to ask how many of these homes were sold versus rented. And that way we're able to see how many are going to homeowners and how many are going to renters. Demonstrate whether or not like their prices and all that stuff are meeting market and that information for the.
We'll say, and I'm looking at Lance because he's had more in-depth experience with it, but I'm not aware of any that were required to convert to rentals, at least in recent history. Are you aware of anything?
I'm not aware of any in the last 10 years.
Most of the houses built were then sold.
And Mennonite Housing tends to try to line up a buyer and get them under contract before construction begins, in part to ensure that that is a complete cycle. The transition to rental is I believe, a federal requirement. And so.
I believe he said he wasn't going to do it this time. They're going to wait and see what the market does.
And that's something that actually the city staff have asked of them, because when they lock that buyer in and lock a contract price in, it doesn't allow for the market to act in that timeline. So they do definitely do. There's some model ships that we have. It also helps to minimize the challenges of locking somebody in at a particular financial points. But then having interest rates increase or something change within that person's individual situation that might mean that a qualified buyer is not necessarily still qualified upon completion.
CapFed and Fidelity are constantly to change some of their programs, especially with new construction, to offset that as well. They've definitely doubled in the last year. Today, it's something below 6.5–7% if we're lucky. Last week, 8%. I know these lenders are trying to keep that a little more safe, but who knows what we're looking at for next year as far as what programs they may have out there.
And with that, we can move on to item number 6.
Sure, and I can do a quick recap. For Mennonite Housing, staff have recommended a 7 for this item, and our analysis on this is that prior to COVID, they had a very, very strong and spotless history. However, during COVID, we have had a number of funding increases. We would recommend taking 1 point off for having increases within that category. They've had a number of completion extensions as well as the labor force and markets were disrupted. Again, we would recommend completion extensions, and then they've had a couple of them that have required 2 extensions. And so that's where we're recommending the 3rd point off. And that's a challenge because, you know, prior to the construction world going crazy, they were extremely viable.
Sarah, did Mennonite give any reasons for the delays? I mean, everything was delayed during COVID. It was, all kinds of stuff. And in some ways, I mean, I'm not going to argue with staff recommendations, but it's just a matter of they asked, they had a need in Habitat. Everything was flowing fine for Habitat, and that's basically it. It wasn't any sort of negligence on their part, was it?
No negligence. Habitat was a lot further along in their previous awards, so they were just pretty much wrapping up during this time. So they didn't experience a lot of the labor shortages and supply shortages that Mennonite did when they were just getting going with their builds. We had a couple other builders that we had to give extensions and get more money to for the same reason that we did Mennonite. So like I said, it was not out of the ordinary. Habitat just kind of had better timing in all this. And so that was the.
Okay, thank you.
And even though COVID was a factor here, I agree with staff in that we should still consider, take that into consideration and deduct points for failing to meet the requirements. Because again, they're asking for funding increases, and I feel like that's where I go back to, like, they're relying heavily on this funding to be able to complete these homes, meaning that I'm guessing there's no backstop with them, no donations or anything they can rely on to cover that cost. Habitat for Humanity mentioned there was increases in costs, but they covered it on their end. And again, not saying that they should match Habitat for Humanity, but just showing that, hey, sometimes things that, can happen, and being able to have that extra funding to be able to complete these homes is crucial, so that they're not asking for more money or potentially not being able to fulfill their end of the bargain, which it does seem like they're able to fulfill it. But again, they have came back to ask for money multiple times. And again, we do want to be considerate of COVID and that it did affect everybody, and not just Mennonite, but also ignore it. My feedback there.
I think Brian also mentioned that they had the purchase prices. That's what I picked up from him.
I will say previously, and I'm speaking a little out of my depth right here, but I believe that previously our program actually had a cap on purchase price. And so that is something that since Mark has retired, that cap has been removed, recognizing that it is not helpful for the program to cap that price. What that means is that if between when that build originates and when it completes, if the appraisals go up beyond what's expected, it can be a challenge for the end purchaser, because even
Or if interest rates fluctuate the wrong way.
so removing the cap allows the builder to realize more of the cost of the build and rely less heavily on potential returning to us for additional funding. We recognize that that was a challenge, but there are challenges on the other side too.
Ultimately, they can make it a rental.
With that, we'll move on to question number 7. Identification of buyers and buyers/selling of homes, marketing and affirmative. that up for general discussion if anyone has feedback on that. No, I guess I'll start. They did bring in some or attach some advertisements there. And they also pointed out that they will have the equal housing opportunity logo added. I would have liked them to expand on that a little bit more as to how are they targeting the community that they will serve in terms of like, are they putting these advertisements at churches? Are they going to city events? Are they partnering with the city? Whatever the case may be, how are they actually in that community besides just their website? I visited their website, attempted to apply. A lot of their pages are not functional. So you would click on for more information and the website would say page not found. So it was a little difficult to get that information from a perspective of maybe I found them online or through a city resource. It seems like when you get the most information is either seeing them in person or potentially calling them. I also looked up at their reviews on Google and it seems like that seems to be friction there for the consumers. They're not able to get the information they need from Mennonite Housing in relation to purchasing homes. And again, if you go to their website, which they provided, you could see if you're trying to look for a home to purchase, it's like affordable housing, there isn't a clear path to get there. And I understand that, again, they're a nonprofit and they might allocate their resources to other things, but even having a simple text-based site as with instructions on how the community could reach out to apply for these homes would be great to see moving forward, as well as adding that clear question in the application. Can you demonstrate or attach some of those advertisements or marketing, and also some events, or where do you pass out these advertisements and marketing materials? Just because if it's only church, I feel like we're leaving out the community who is not religious. So we want to make sure that they're reaching out to all communities and not specific communities that qualify within their target.
If I recall, they're a part of a larger national organization, right? And I don't have the name of that off the top of my head. That helps keep them compliant in ways or helps provide, maybe through their resources, marketing to areas. Is anyone remembering this?
Yes, they are an affiliate of NeighborWorks, which is a network. I believe it's a federally funded resource that provides quite a bit of accountability structure, best practices. They have to meet certain criteria and thresholds within those evaluations to remain that affiliate. And I think that also offers them support and accountability.
Well, and I just bring that, I bring that back into the conversation just because I'm not familiar with that network, but I imagine it would require some level of consistency with the buyers that they are advertising to. And they're also working with Cap Fed on a grant program as well for their applicants. So they seem to be proud of that and that partnership.
And with that, if there's no further comment, we'll move on to section 8. Rental property management. The applicant have the capacity to manage rental property or documented relationship with a professional property management firm, and should the rental management. I rated them a 5 just because I did look them up and they do seem to manage a lot of properties. That it is heavily focused on the website, and that's where my feedback for number 7 came from, in that you could find more information on the rental properties, but less on these home purchases. Definitely seems like they have the experience managing rental properties, and they would be able, it would need to be managed property if it had to become a rental.
Any additional feedback on rental property development?
Not, we'll move on to,
One question, this is section 8, it's for 15 years, that's correct.
Yes, I believe so.
That's fine.
And really that falls into that end use has to conform to either home ownership for 10 years under the down payment assistance or rental under developer assistance for 15. And that's how we conduct our monitoring internally to ensure that the properties built with these funds are compliant.
That's a good question, John.
um, last section, number 9. It just states if, and staff could correct me if I'm wrong, but just pretty much asking if they're Chodo certified, correct?
This is they either are or they are not.
Yeah, so they were, for me, that's 10 points because they aren't.
Future, if we were to redesign this application to have like a minimum score required, I would imagine that that would actually be a scoring bonus rather than included in the score, because we do know that some are and some are not. In this case, yes, they are.
I'm sorry, going back to number 7. We don't score down if they have not identified a committed qualified buyer at this time, correct? It just says priority will be given to organizations. Midnight Housing didn't demonstrate commitments from a qualified buyer. However, I didn't score down for that. I just should have asked for clarification.
Yeah, I think they were able to indicate that they have plenty of buyers in the pipeline, that it
Yes.
still not be a problem to ensure they're not.
Habitat throughout the numbers, and I think I was looking for. Okay.
And so again, staff did recommend, after a conversation with them, we recommended approval of the commitment of funds for 4. But ultimately that is the board's choice to whether or not to recommend that to council. And then it will be the council's choice whether to approve that funding. And so I do have preliminary text up here if that is the action the board wishes to take, but it's ultimately up to the board.
I have a question for staff. If we came to different, well, let's say we awarded 2 homes just to determine performance, does that affect the city of Wichita's requirement to allocate these funds, and those funds that were left over, what happens to them?
Sure, I think under that circumstance, we would still have part of our Chodo requirement remaining. And so we would either need to recruit to probably, given that our other Chodo does not currently have an application pending, we would probably want to recommend working with Mennonite Housing to get to the point where this board was comfortable with the remaining 2. But that could be done. I think that would be the biggest thing. The remaining funds would just remain unallocated until such a time that another application, or I guess 3, up to 3 or more in that case, because there are additional funds that are not yet, not yet applied for. Now, my recommendation as staff, just from a partnership situation, is that if there are areas that the board is uncomfortable or has additional questions, I would recommend that potentially we bring Mennonite Housing back in to try to answer questions, because we do want to, they are a good partner and want to make sure that they don't feel like anything was arbitrary. But that is action that could be taken if, given recent history, if the board felt uncomfortable with funding the whole request.
And so your recommendation is that if we don't agree on allocating the whole request before we submit our recommendation, to have them come back in to talk about it so that we could potentially approve the whole amount? Or are you suggesting that it is okay to maybe approve some and then continue to talk it over with them for the remainder?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think through it really quickly. I think there are a few details that we would need to talk through because specifically we will want to get down to the project level and identify which sites we would be preliminary approving funding for and which ones would not. That could kick the discussion more to that granular level in terms, and that would make sense, especially if we were talking about potential contaminants or environmental considerations. I think we would need to narrow down specifically which ones you were and were not. And that might be most easily done in conversation. Just if they had sites that they felt were more ready or more easily buildable or something like that.
I believe the contamination areas east of this, of these houses, the community contamination involved with the railroad up there is east of these properties. That's something you might want to check.
We do have Tanner in the room. He has done our cursory environmental reviews.
So all of the properties for both Mennonite and Habitat fall either within the 19th and Grove or the 29th and Grove groundwater plume. So
They fall within it.
they do fall within it. Now, the project size, since there's 4 houses on each application, through HUD environmental review guidance, there is a way that they would handle that site contamination. They don't have to come in and do a what's called phase 1 environmental assessment. Looking at these properties and other houses that have been built in these areas, generally what's done is the installation of like a vapor mitigation system installed in the basement. It's constantly running. Any vapors that are coming in from the ground get pushed out. So that was really the only environmental concern, but pretty, that's a pretty mild environmental concern on these.
So can I just ask, the cost of having that done, is that outlined in the construction cost? Would that be a cost of Mennonite to incur?
Yeah, yes, it would be a cost. And the cost that I've got, it kind of averages on the vapor mitigation system is $1,100 to $1,300 per house.
Required to install our radon system. So it's some economy of scale there.
Okay, so yeah, that would be a higher cost, so it might be even lower.
I don't think radon has anything to do with groundwater pollution.
Right, but they, I think as Lance was saying, they're required to put in radon. So the same installer of the radon system would be installing the vapor mitigation system. So there's a possibility that that would lower the cost.
Are you sure these are within that plume?
Yes. Yeah. I can
They're
send
in
you.
all of those plans. They've always been installed. It's, Mark required that. It was just part of the home new construction program.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send you a screenshot through the ADHE has their.
I went to a couple of meetings, so
Okay.
The environmental review should state that requirement as well, and it always has.
It's $1,200 in the budget for that.
Yes, I would recommend that if the board wanted to approve less than what is recommended, I think it would be easiest if we could have that as a conversation with Mennonite Housing to identify preferred parcels, to discuss any impact on purchase options or things like that. Because they might find that some properties within their proposal would be more or less ideal for holding or moving forward.
There could be a, oh, my apologies.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, there could be an impact. We just need to recognize if we did not provide the funding for all four, there could be a construction cost impact with subs and so forth.
True.
Working on fewer homes than all four, so.
I think both entities do look for some economy of scale within the builds. I know specifically housing or Habitat does through staging of materials but I think those are conversations that would be good to have.
Does the board have any feedback as to how to recommend, how to proceed with this recommendation? Whether it's for recommending full funding or, you know, sort of
Motion.
I might say, just from my perspective, I would support the recommendation made by staff to fully fund. I think what makes me feel a little bit better is that we do have 90,000 remaining in this funding year for 2022, meaning that if they were to go over, there is room within the allocation to do that.
and did you want to make a motion for that, Stacy? We could vote on it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and motion.
Second,
Don't be a coward.
second.
So there's a motion on the table. Valerie seconded. All those in favor,
What's the motion?
to approve the new application as is.
Recommended by the staff.
Would you like me to pull that text back up just to make it formal?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, there we go.
Relates to 4-2.
Full recommendation, full funding.
Are we funding this whole thing then?
Yeah, 360,000 for Mennonite housing.
Yes.
We have an aye from Brad, and just so we have it formal, the recommendation motion brought up by Stacy, it is recommended that the Affordable Housing Review Board recommend approval of the Home Investment Partnership Program funding allocation of $360,000 for Mennonite Housing Rehabilitation Services Incorporated and submit the recommendation for conditional commitment of funds to the Wichita City Council.
And I second.
And yeah, Valerie seconded. Brad voted aye. I'm voting aye.
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 I'm going to abstain.
And John abstains.
Final vote was 5-1 with one absence. Or I'm sorry, five aye, one abstain, and one absence.
I'll leave it to the city council's judgment.
And I will say, in the housing world, we don't have small motions, so good job getting to that. Other council members have to gasp for air at the end too.
With that, I guess the motion passes and the recommendation set for city council.
Back to where we can see all the board members attending online.
On to second application from App for Humanity. For section developer plan. Feedback.
I think they gave a very detailed narrative, just like reading that, I guess. I had scored it as a 10. They had floor plan photos, half the presentation.
Describe the area as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also gave the 10. I tried to look at it without a bias, but they are very well structured. But we have to allocate points if they're doing what they're supposed to. With that, there's no more feedback on number one. We'll move to number two. It's just other financing and matching funds. They require 25% local match. And as staff mentioned earlier, Habitat for Humanity does a 0% loan, so they far exceed that. I personally, again, gave it a 10 for number two as well. If there's any feedback there. No other feedback, we'll move on to number three. Section number three, qualifications and development project manager experience of applicant. I quoted at 15. Simply for Habitat for Humanity has a record, not just locally, but nationwide to perform and build homes for communities which we serve.
I feel like there was some missing information regarding subcontractors. I know they have volunteers, but there was no information. They provided it when we met with them, but there was nothing in the application.
I got a little hung up on the history of the
Yeah.
duration
I
of
did
the
too.
subcontractors. They identified 6, but you know, what was the time frame? Just that is always nice to know. And like I said, that can definitely be variable in these last 3 years as to duration.
Yeah, and as to feedback provided earlier on Mennonite, it would be great to have some type of subcontractor analysis, what they're being charged. I know when Habitat for Humanity presented, they did answer some questions that were on the application, but they were questions we brought up here, so it is good to potentially put those questions in the application so that when we're reviewing or evaluating these applications, basing it off of the application and not based off of the feedback or questions answered during that day. So that's great. Yeah, the presentation. So that is great feedback that we should consider. There's no other feedback on number three. There's no other feedback on number three. We'll move to number four, which is financial feasibility of development.
And they don't use outside financing. Completion time is December of 2024. Things were spelled out on page 17 and 18.
Did answer the timeline in question one, like the other.
We have no other feedback. We were number three, right?
Number 5. One and number 5.
Oh, we were, okay. No more feedback on number four. Moving on to number 5. Financial condition and performance record. Again, it's hard to not give Habitat for Humanity almost perfect scores for a simple fact that they are a huge organization with lots of backing from different funding. Even as in the presentation mentioned, they get their donations of appliances from Whirlpool, which is definitely going to help them build these homes at a lower cost and provide appliances to the communities at no cost. So they're definitely working with a lot of large organizations. And yeah, I didn't see any feedback there for me personally, but if there's any feedback. And if there's no other feedback on number 5, we'll move on to number 6, utilization of prior home program funds. Like again, number 10 for me, they seem to utilize home funding well, and they build those homes and they haven't asked for funding increases. Even if their overhead does increase, they are able to come up with those funds and finish these homes for the community.
And that staff had completed an analysis of the past 5 years, and there were no funding increases requested or no completion extensions requested. I think in the presentation, they did mention that they had some other projects that did not use this funding source, that where some timelines got extended, but they were extremely diligent to make sure that all the timelines tied to this funding source were met. So staff recommended 10.
If no other feedback on 6, we'll move on to section 7, which is identification of buyers and selling of homes, marketing, and for a marketing plan.
I think I had written down that they had 22 families in the pipeline and almost half of them have met 50% of the requirements for hours.
That as well.
Yeah.
Habitat did a really nice job with their affirmative marketing plan by listing which of the language they're putting their materials into.
Yeah.
And where all they're gonna advertise, did a nice job.
And if you go to their website, you could find a lot of resources and easily get to applying and finding out more information about their program. So they make it really easy for the community or the consumers to get information and apply for an affordable house. There's no more feedback on 7, then we'll move on to number 8, which is rental property. This one would be an NA for me. I don't believe they manage any rentals, but I don't know how we could score it, whether they have the ability to. I'm guessing they would go to a third party, but does it seem that they do have a result?
Yeah, they did identify that Mennonite.
They would
Oh,
part-
okay,
part
they're part of
from
it.
that.
Yeah, I gave them 2 points because they didn't have any experience, but they had a plan. It's kind of a short plan, but at least they had some ideas.
This seems like they don't have any issues selling their home, so that's probably why they didn't have a plan. So I get that point, but I don't know how to score that. I can't really say 5, so they don't have any experience. So I just feel like it's not applicable. I mean, in a sense, but that is something I had a challenge with. Because it doesn't seem like they would ever need to rent out their homes or have a desire to rent them out. But if there's no more feedback on number 8, we'll move on to number 9. Just certification. NA, not sure if we should put 0 there. They're not certified, so the award points if it's based off of the certification they don't have.
Yes, that would be an all or nothing question, and I had reached out to Logan. She had a conflict today, but she said basically their board composition doesn't qualify, and my guess would be that just their model and the way that they resource, that's probably not necessarily a qualification they're going to be seeking. So that's the answer we have.
So how do you recommend we score that? Is a recommendation to score at 0 or?
Yes, I would recommend scoring at 0, and I think I'm making notes on application revisions. In the future, we might make that basically kind of a scoring bonus rather than included in any score division. Just so it would be a 0 with no impact to an overall percentage or a 10 bonus points. And ultimately, that would come into play in terms of if we were looking at more applications than funds available, we would probably prioritize those that met that photo op. But that's not the situation that we're finding ourselves in today. So And having gone through everything, staff is recommending the funding of all 4 proposed bills through Habitat for Humanity. We feel like they're a very strong partner with long established history. They are able to actually, their model in particular brings that project price point down. So that the gap financing that we've provided has actually been fairly meaningful, allowing us to do additional projects, and that they've had a very strong history working with our program. So I am glad to pull that text up. Nobody wants to make a motion without the prompt. I get it. Okay, here we go.
I want to make a motion.
I will motion to approve it.
I second. I second it, full approval, made by Amanda. So the board, motion brought up by Miranda, seconded by myself, Anthony Gallardo. Is the recommendation, it is recommended that the Affordable Housing Review Board recommend approval of the Home Investment Partnerships Program funding allocation of $147,931.60 for Wichita Habitat for Humanity Incorporated, and submits a recommendation for a conditional commitment to Wichita City Council. With that motion on the floor, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye for myself. Oops, motion.
Oh yeah, did we vote when we make the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.
All right. So that's 5 ayes and 1 abstain from John.
Yes.
Oh,
1 absence. Thank you. Thank you, board members. That's been a lot of work to navigate through, and certainly diving in after there's trying to dive in deep into something that is extremely complex. I think one of the values of having fairly new staff is trying to meet you where you're at, trying to break it down and translate it. It's certainly been learning. I appreciate also ways that we can make this easier journey for everybody going forward.
And I appreciate staff for providing all the information and being open and receptive to feedback as far as what information can be provided in the future to help us evaluate the application. So appreciate staff, especially with managing and running the meetings as well, and making sure, because as we all know, we're all just the public here and our best.
So our final item on the agenda is adjourning.
Do we still plan to meet again in November?
I will check into that. I believe we have received a HDLP application for multifamily rental. If I took my guess where we stand right now, we will probably not have that evaluated and underwriting done and ready for the board's review. And I guess we will probably not meet again. But I will try to get an answer within the next couple days, just for planning purposes. The multifamily is more complex than the single family, and we've got some deeper review to do.
Is there any other comments from anyone joining us online?
I do not have any.
If no other comments, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Get that.
Second.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
You're opposed.
You're late.
What's going on?
We're gonna call that a time delay.
Yeah.
One mistake, you know.
Yeah. Well, either way, the ayes have it, Brad, so the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye.